For 17 years, my parents did not send a birthday card, a Christmas call, or even a single message asking whether I was still alive. Then the local paper ran my photo in front of the company I built, and my phone lit up 14 times in 20 minutes. I let it ring. At first, I didn't even realize who it was. The number had my hometown area code. That was all. I was standing in the loading bay outside my office in Lexington, Kentucky, with a folded newspaper under one arm and a half-finished coffee going cold in my hand. The article had come out that morning. It was a local business feature about Hale Industrial Supply landing a city contract and expanding into a second warehouse. There was a photo of me in a navy blazer smiling in front of the building I had spent 9 years building from nothing. I had looked at that photo for maybe 2 seconds. Not because I wasn't proud, because pride still feels strange when you grow up learning not to take up room. The first call came at 7:18 that night. The second at 7:20. By 7:38, there were 14. Same number, no voicemail. Then finally, a text from my mother. I knew it was her the second I read the first line because guilt has a voice even over text. Mara, please answer. We need to talk as a family. Family. That word sat on my screen like a joke told by the wrong person at the wrong funeral. My name is Mara Hale. I'm 34 years old. When I was 12, my parents drove me to St. Agnes Children's Home with 2 trash bags of clothes, 1 winter coat, and the promise that it was only for a little while. They kept my brother. They kept my sister. They left me. That was the shape of my childhood in one sentence. People always want a more complicated explanation than that because the simple version is too ugly. They ask if there was addiction, violence, a court case, some dramatic reason I don't mention. There wasn't. My parents were poor, overwhelmed, and very good at deciding which burden they could most easily set down. My little brother Noah was 7. My sister Lily was 5. I was 12 and old enough to notice everything. Old enough to remember the drive. My mother in the passenger seat twisting a tissue in her lap. My father saying this was temporary 3 different times before we even got there. My trash bags at my feet in the back seat. The red brick building with the statue of the Virgin Mary out front. The way my mother would not look directly at me when we walked inside. The nun at the desk asked gently whether I had any questions. I had one. When are they coming back? My father answered before she could. Soon. That was the first lie. A month later, they sent 1 postcard with a picture of a lake on the front. No return address. My mother wrote, "We are getting things sorted and we love you very much." After that, nothing. Not 1 visit, not 1 birthday, not 1 Christmas, not 1 "How are you managing there?" Nothing. That is what people do not understand about abandonment. It is not always 1 dramatic moment. Sometimes it is 1 decision followed by 17 years of confirming it. St. Agnes was not cruel, which somehow made the whole thing harder to explain. I was fed, schooled, given a bed. There were nuns who tried, social workers who used soft voices, volunteers who brought donated toys at Christmas. I had worse things than loneliness to compare myself to, which made me feel guilty for how much the loneliness still hurt. But I watched other girls get picked up for weekends. I watched other kids get awkward visits from parents trying and failing. I watched envelopes arrive. I got very good at pretending I did not look every time the mail cart came down the hall. The worst part was not even that my parents left me. It was that they continued being a family without me. I knew because once when I was 15, one of the staff left the office computer open and I typed my mother's name into an early social media site. Up came a grainy church picnic photo. My father was standing behind Noah with 1 hand on his shoulder. My mother had Lily on her lap. They were smiling like ordinary people who had never driven their daughter to a children's home and unloaded her like she was seasonal storage. I stared at that photo until the screen blurred. That was the day I understood something I wish I hadn't learned so young. They had not lost me. They had continued without me. There's a difference. I aged out of St. Agnes at 18 with 1 duffel bag, $600 from a church scholarship fund, and a social worker named Mrs. Pritchard who hugged like she meant it and said, "You are going to build a life no one gets to take credit for." At the time, I didn't believe her. I worked at a diner first, then a warehouse office, then dispatch, then procurement. Then I started brokering surplus parts out of a rented storage unit with 1 folding table and a laptop that overheated if I ran too many tabs. Everything I built after that I built without parents to call, without a family safety net, without anyone showing up to clap when things got hard. So when my phone lit up 14 times in 20 minutes because a newspaper ran my face next to the words founder and owner, I didn't feel curiosity. I felt insult because now suddenly I was visible enough to contact. I sat at my kitchen counter that night and opened the text thread. "Mara,
Please answer. We need to talk as a family. Your father and I have been trying to reach you. Please don't ignore this. Your brother saw the article. He is in a very difficult situation.
He needs help and we are begging you not to punish him for our mistakes. I read that message twice, not because it confused me, because it told me everything immediately. They had not found me because they were sorry. They had not found me because they missed me. They had not found me because 17 years of silence had finally become unbearable. They found me because my brother needed something. And then, as if my mother had spent all 17 years saving the cruelest sentence for the right moment, another text came through. If you have any heart left for this family, call me before Noah does something desperate.
I stared at the screen for a long time after that.
Then I put the phone face down on the counter, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down the old plastic file box I had not opened in years. Because if my parents wanted to reopen the past now, I was not going into that call empty-handed. The plastic file box still had my name on it in black marker from St. Agnes. Mara Hale intake exit. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and stared at it for a full minute before opening the lid. Inside was my childhood and paperwork, my intake sheet, my vaccination record, a church scholarship form, 2 report cards, 1 Polaroid of me at 16 in a choir robe I barely remembered wearing, and the postcard my mother sent that first month, the one with the lake on the front and no return address on the back.
We are getting things sorted and we love you very much. That sentence had aged badly.
Under the postcard was a manila envelope labeled Family Contact History.
There was almost nothing in it. 1 incoming postcard.
No scheduled visits, no holiday requests, no birthday contact, no release inquiry, no reunification follow-up.
That was the thing about St. Agnes. They wrote everything down.
Silence leaves a record if the right office is patient enough.
Then I found the intake summary. Reason for placement.
Temporary financial hardship, unable to manage child at home.
Sibling status. 2 younger siblings remain with parents.
Expected reunification timeline undetermined. There was a handwritten note at the bottom from Sister Bernadette.
The nun at the front desk on the day they left me.
Child repeatedly asked when parents would return.
Father stated soon.
Mother unable to answer directly. I touched that line once with my thumb, then put the paper down because there it was, the whole injury in 7 or 8 typed lines and 1 handwritten sentence. Not a tragedy, not a misunderstanding, a choice.
My phone buzzed again. Mom calling.
I almost let it keep ringing.
Almost.
But there is a point when silence stops protecting you and starts protecting the people who earned it. I wanted to hear how 17 years of abandonment sounded when it finally needed something.
So I answered. Neither of us said hello.
Mara, my mother said in a voice already wet with tears.
I leaned back in my chair. You found my number. We've been trying. No, I said you've been absent. Tonight you tried.
She made a small choking sound like accuracy had personally offended her. Honey, please.
We know we have no right to ask anything from you.
That sentence lasted less than 5 seconds. Then she asked anyway. Noah is in terrible trouble. Of course, he was because I did not exist to them as daughter. I existed as solution. I said nothing. So, she kept going. 2 years earlier, Noah started a roofing company with 1 friend and a loan my father helped secure. Then came bad contracts, payroll issues, unpaid taxes, and finally the kind of private lenders people call investors when they are still pretending to stay respectable. He owes $184,000, my mother whispered.
Some of it is attached to the house.
I closed my eyes, not because the number shocked me, because she got to it so fast.
No, how have you been? No, I'm sorry. No, I think about you every birthday.
Just the figure.
$184,000. She kept talking. Your father co-signed more than he should have.
The bank is threatening action.
Noah hasn't been sleeping. Lily's husband won't help. We don't know where else to turn. Then she finally said the line I think she had rehearsed before dialing.
When we saw your article, we thought maybe God was giving this family one more chance.
That almost made me laugh.
Not because it was funny, because people always call it God when they mean your labor finally looks valuable from a distance. I said, how much did it cost to leave me?
Silence. Real silence this time.
Then my mother whispered, Mara, please don't do this.
Do what? Punish everyone for what happened back then? Back then.
As if abandonment had an expiration date. As if 17 birthdays without a card were just one old event sitting harmlessly in the past. I looked down at Sister Bernadette's note still lying open on the table. Child repeatedly asked when parents would return. I was 12, I said. You left me in an orphanage and kept the other two kids.
It wasn't like that.
I laughed once.
Sharp, small, involuntary. That is exactly what it was like.
She started crying harder then, but I had heard enough tears in my life to know the difference between grief and pressure. These were pressure tears, the kind meant to make refusal feel crueler than the original wound.
Then she said something worse.
Noah was just a child, too.
There it was.
The family religion in one sentence.
Noah was a child. Lily was a child. I had been 12 and somehow counted as absorbable. I said, so was I. She had no answer for that.
Instead, she did what people like my mother always do when the moral argument collapses.
She returned to logistics.
If you can help us, just enough to stop the bank and settle the worst of it. Your father says the exact amount to stabilize everything is $120,000 by Friday.
Friday? Not someday. Not when you can. Not if you're willing. By Friday.
I stared at the intake form, the one that recorded in clean institutional language that my parents had remained a family after dropping me off. Then another text came through while I still had her on the line from Noah. I know I don't deserve to ask, but Mom says you're doing well. Please don't make my kids pay for what happened to you. I read that twice, then a third time. Because it was so perfect in the worst possible way.
They had not called to give me back anything. They had called to assign me a new bill. I did not call my mother back.
I did not text Noah either. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table in Lexington with a file box open and started pulling the past into one stack clean enough to mail. The intake summary from St. Agnes, the postcard with the lake on the front, the school records listing no approved family pickup, a copy of the article with my photo in front of the company they had suddenly remembered to care about, and folded in the back of the contact history envelope, one document I had missed the first time, a parental placement authorization, typed, signed, stamped.
Both my parents' names were on it.
I read the first page once, then again slower. Temporary residential placement requested by parent or guardian. Then farther down, sibling status. 2 younger children remain in parental care by parent request.
My whole body went cold.
Not because I didn't know they kept Noah and Lily, because there it was in institutional language. Not a circumstance, not an emergency, not a vague family collapse, a request.
They had not just left me and taken the other 2 home. They had done it on paper. I kept reading. Contact arrangement. Parent initiated only until further review. I stared at that line for a long time. Parent initiated only. That meant the silence had not just happened.
It had been structured. If I had begged staff to call them, there was a good chance the answer would have depended on whether my parents chose to reopen the door. My mother's Christmas silence, my father's missing birthday cards.
Every year I spent thinking they had forgotten me.
Maybe forgetting had been too generous a word.
Maybe they had simply never reopened the file. I made copies of everything.
Not because I was afraid of losing the originals, because once you've been erased by family, duplication starts to feel like oxygen.
Then I wrote one note on plain white paper. You found my number because you saw what I built.
Before you ask me to save the family you kept, read the file on the daughter you left. I addressed the package to my father, not my mother. My mother used tears. Noah would use desperation, but my father was the wall, the one who let everything sound orderly long enough to live with it. If the wall was going to crack, it had to crack under documents. At the shipping counter, the clerk asked if I wanted signature confirmation. Yes, I said.
Insurance?
I thought about the intake form, the postcard, the authorization page with my parents' signatures on it. No, I said, just make sure it gets there. By the time I got home, Noah had sent 6 more texts.
Please don't do this.
Dad says. You're upset.
If you want me to apologize, fine.
Just don't let them lose the house.
That line told me everything. He didn't know what I was holding. He still thought this was about mood. It wasn't. It was about records.
2 days later, the tracking updated, delivered, signed for by Daniel Hale.
My father had the file. He didn't call that night. Neither did my mother.
That silence felt different, not clean like the 17 years before.
Charged. The next morning, just after 7, my father called. I answered on the 3rd ring. Neither of us said hello. He sounded older than he had in my memory.
Not softer, not kinder, just older. How much of that package did you know before you mailed it?
He asked. All of it. A pause.
Then the contact page.
There it was.
Not the postcard, not the intake summary, not the line about my siblings staying home. The contact page. Because that was the page he had not expected.
I leaned back in my chair and said nothing. He kept going. Your mother checked parent initiated only.
I closed my eyes, not because it surprised me, because hearing him say it out loud made it real in a different register.
Paper is one thing.
A parent reading the line they let stand for 17 years is another. She also checked no scheduled reunification until family stabilization, he said. His voice caught slightly on the last word, stabilization. That same dead family word people use when what they really mean is not you, not yet, not worth disrupting the others for. I looked out the window at the Kentucky morning and asked the question I should have asked years earlier.
Did you know she marked it that way? He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough to hurt.
Then he said very quietly, I knew we were leaving you there. I did not know she made the silence formal. And for the first time since the article ran, I realized this might become bigger than begging for money. Because the line on the paper had done something my success never could. It had made my father read the abandonment in administrative English, and men like him often survive feeling. It's the wording that finally gets them. My father called back that night, not to ask for money. That mattered. He sounded like a man speaking from the wrong side of a burned bridge. I read the whole file, he said. I waited. Then he said the sentence I think had been sitting in his throat for 17 years, waiting for the paperwork to drag it out. I told myself temporary meant less if I didn't ask what your mother had actually signed. There it was. Not innocence, not confusion, not a man tricked out of fatherhood by one bad form. A choice made easier by not reading closely. I looked at the contact page still open on my table and asked, Did you ever try to come back for me? He took too long to answer, then quietly, No.
That was the worst part.
Worse than the lies, worse than the silence, worse than the sudden begging. Because once you know the truth, drama loses a lot of its charm. What remains is scale. I had spent 17 years imagining some complicated tragedy big enough to explain what happened.
Sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes your parents just keep driving.
He started crying then, but softly. Not my mother's theatrical crying.
Not pressure tears.
The tired kind that arrive after a man realizes the file in front of him is more honest than the story he's been living inside. I can't undo it, he said.
No, I replied. You can't.
Then, because he had finally earned exactly one direct answer, he asked, Are you going to help Noah? I thought about the number, 120,000 by Friday, the article, the sudden family language, the fact that not one of them had called when I turned 18, 21, 30, or 34. Then I said, No.
He breathed once through his nose.
Not relief, not anger, recognition. I understand, he said. That was the closest thing to respect I had ever heard from him. My mother called 3 more times from different numbers. I blocked them all. Noah sent one last message at 11:42 that night. So, you'll let us lose the house over what happened when we were kids. I read it twice, then I answered once.
You were a child then? You are not a child now. I am not your bailout. He never texted me again.
A week later, I got one email from my father. No begging, no pressure, no family language, just the truth laid out badly but honestly. He said the bank would force a sale unless Noah found another solution. He said my mother still insisted I was punishing everyone for one old decision. He said Lily refused to get involved. And then he said the thing I think he had finally understood too late. We built stability out of your absence and called it necessity. I read that line 3 times because yes, that was exactly what they did. They didn't survive tragedy. They organized themselves around losing me. I did not send money. What I sent instead went to St. Agnes.
$10,000.
Aged out support fund restricted to girls leaving with one bag, one file, and no one coming back for them.
I wrote one instruction on the form.
Use it before they have to learn the difference between being left and being forgotten.
That was the only rescue I believed in. The bank did take the house.
Noah's business collapsed the rest of the way.
My mother wrote me twice after that.
Both times trying to turn loss into shared grief, and both times I left the emails unanswered.
My father sent one birthday card the next year.
No speech, no demand, just my name written carefully and a line saying he hoped Kentucky had been kind to me. I kept it, not because it repaired anything, but because it was the first card he had ever sent without needing something back.
I still run the company.
The article yellowed at the fold where I kept it in my desk drawer for a while, then finally framed it in the office where nobody has to earn the right to look at me with pride. And every year on the week of my birthday, I send another check to St. Agnes and think about the difference between a family asking if you're alive and a building that at least wrote down that nobody had.
My parents begged years later because they saw what I built.
But the truth is, I built it because they left. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have answered the first call or let the silence speak longer? And do you think the worst part was the begging, the paperwork, or hearing your father admit he never came back? If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next.